Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha. On this auspicious occasion of what is now called the ISKCON Shravanam week, Srila Prabhupada's book reading week, in our series of discussions and interviews with senior leaders in ISKCON, I have the great privilege and fortune to invite today His Holiness Bhakti Caitanya Maharaj. Maharaj is currently our executive committee member at the GBC body. And as many of you have heard and realized through the talks that Maharaj has given, through his participation in yatras and parikramas, Maharaj is an avid reader of Srila Prabhupada's books and an educator, as many of us have seen. So I just mentioned about Maharaj's managerial roles, but a lot of us relate to Maharaj as a spiritual master, as an instructing spiritual master, and as a teacher. Maharaj, thank you for accepting to speak to us today.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Maharaj, what is your first or the most fond memory of reading Srila Prabhupada's books?
Yes. There's a very significant happening in my life in that regard. After I had been a devotee already for a couple of years in England, and our program there was very rigorous. Very busy. We didn't sleep much. And as a result, when I would try to read, there was a tendency to fall asleep. But one time we were on traveling Sankirtan, distributing books in Northern Ireland. And I would finish my rounds and then I would have half an hour to read. And in order to deal with this problem of tending to fall asleep sometimes, I got the inspiration to take notes as I would read. So I remember the first day I did it, I was reading 15 minutes Srimad Bhagavatam, 15 minutes Caitanya Charitamrita. And I saw that by taking notes of all the interesting points I came across, I didn't fall asleep. It was remarkable. So I adopted that as an ongoing strategy, and it just worked every time. And as a result, I still have those notes from 1975, 1976. I've still got those notes, a number of ring binders, a few hundred pages of handwritten notes, which I still use because I have to give class a lot. Yes. And so I've taken the notes according to different headings, different topics, hearing, chanting, whatever, associating, many different topics, and a lot of information. So oftentimes when I have to give a class, I read the verse, then I read through the purport and make a note of what the main subjects are that are discussed, that Prabhupada discusses in the purport, and then I just go back to my notes.
Oh.
And it's like a gold mine, honestly.
Yes. And
in fact, one devotee right at this moment is typing them out, and we're going to make them available. This whole repository of notes by subject with quotes, verses, and from the purports of Prabhupada. And it revolutionized my reading. It absolutely revolutionized it, because we were sleeping, on average, maybe 5 hours a night. But this way, I didn't fall asleep. So,
Maharaj, in the context of process, the 9 devotional processes of bhakti, where does the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books, where does that figure?
Oh, reading is hearing. It's Shravanam. Yes. And of course, that's the first process, and it's the most foundational process, in that if you hear, then you'll be able to chant. Of course, if you don't hear, you'll have nothing to chant about. So if you hear, then you can chant. And if you hear, when you chant, you hear also, and then you can remember. And like this, those 9 devotional processes, they tend to, one follows on from the other, and you get a whole continuum, which then just pervades your entire life in Krishna consciousness and all the different activities and aspects of your life in Krishna consciousness based on hearing. So, yes, I'm right at this very moment, I'm doing a seminar online every day, at least 5 days a week on Bhagavad Gita. So I'm rereading the entire Bhagavad Gita, and it is just so wonderful, just so wonderful. I don't know how many times I've read Bhagavad Gita, but this is another time I'm reading the whole book, and it's just so enriching and so wonderful. I love it.
And possibly ever fresh, as they say, Srila Prabhupada's writings.
It's ever fresh. Oh yeah, it's just like, it's nectar. So much revelation, that so many things that I don't recall having noticed before. That Prabhupada, there's just so much in practically every sentence. There's a whole world of understanding. It's quite incredible. And the devotees, we're doing this seminar online. We've got several hundred devotees, and they're in ecstasy.
I was told almost 700 on an average are participating on this. That's a big number, Maharaj, under the circumstances. Maharaj, going back into the early years of your time in the Krishna conscious movement, what was the culture then about reading? How focused were devotees about reading? What did Prabhupada say about reading? And did you personally have any incident where Prabhupada was speaking and emphasizing on reading in your presence there?
I don't recall being present when Prabhupada personally addressed the subject, but we were brahmacharis. I joined in January 73, and it was a busy life of mainly going out on Sankirtan, actually. And our leader, the Sankirtan leader, he made sure that we read for at least half an hour every day. Although, like I said, with me, it ended up with falling asleep, at least often. But one thing he told us in terms of culture, and I don't even know if it's really true, but at least he told us that Srila Prabhupada said that if you read Bhagavad Gita 27 times, it becomes part of you. Now, I must admit, I've not come across that. I would say I'm fairly well read, and I do a huge amount of research for classes. So I haven't seen that. But whether Prabhupada said it or not, it's a pretty good idea. If we read Bhagavad Gita, and when we're finished, we read it again, and we carry on like that, then, well, it's going to have such a deep effect on our lives. And I feel like that with myself, that it's benefited me just enormously. I would say I couldn't even say how much it's benefited me. And it's like my whole life is resting on this, on the reading of Prabhupada's books. And let
That's
me
a
just
very
add,
powerful statement coming from you. Maharaj,
well,
would you be so kind to elaborate for us? How does it really work? The
okay.
reading of books and our nourishment of Krishna consciousness?
Well, Srila Prabhupada's present and Krishna's present and the different personalities who are speaking, like in the Bhagavatam and in the different pastimes and so on, everyone's present. So it's a living culture. Before I was a devotee, I was also an avid reader, absolutely avid reader. And in fact, I wanted to be a writer. I worked as a journalist for 3 years before becoming a devotee. But now this is different. I read almost everyone who's famous, at least in British English culture. So many. But now this is different because it's living. Those, even though the writers in many cases are extremely clever, but it's not living, it's dead. So, but with our Krishna conscious literatures, it's alive. And if we really tune in, like everything, you have to tune in, really get into it in order to receive what it has to offer. But if you really tune in, then you find that this penetrates to the core of your existence. The concepts, the ideas, they're not exactly ideas, but what is stated, the different points made, conceptions, and they permeate one's being, and then one's person, one's personality, one's character, one's perspectives on life, on oneself, and everything in life. All these things become based on Krishna consciousness. And, this is really what Krishna consciousness is, actually, that we replace our old consciousness, material consciousness, with a consciousness which is actually transcendental and really transcendentally valid. Real transcendental truth starts to underpin all of our attitudes, all of our perceptions, our perspectives on life, on other people. So reading the books, chanting, of course, chanting Hare Krishna, that's there. And that's another absolutely amazing thing. But the reading is somewhat different in that you're getting all these different conceptions and understandings. Of course, if we chant, then Krishna will reveal to us. But in this case, it's just all being presented to you. All the revelation is just coming. You don't have to wait for some esoteric experience of the dawning of something upon you. But it's all there in very straightforward ways. And Prabhupada is just so fantastically expert. The more I read Prabhupada, the more I appreciate the only term I can use, really, I think, is fantastic. He's fantastically expert in terms of the depth of his understanding on one hand, and on the other hand, his expertise, the inspiration he's getting from Krishna, how to present it. So, one thing I could say, it's an interesting point. I went through a period for a couple of years. It was back in the very late 80s, like 89, then into 90, 91, 92, 93, maybe 5 years, where somehow or other, by the influence of association that I was getting from certain devotees, I started reading the writings of the six Goswamis, all the Sandarbhas, numerous times, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, his purports, Srila Baladev Vijayabhushan, these great, very, very great devotees. And that was also, it had a very profound effect on me. But at the same time, I was continuing to read Prabhupada. And after a while, I realized that what Prabhupada is giving and the way he's giving, there's not really a need to read anyone else other than Prabhupada. There's not really a need. That Prabhupada has captured things and is presenting things on the same level as these very great devotees of bygone ages, so to speak. So since then, I hardly read. I do read a little the previous acharyas, but I would say at least 90% I just read from Srila Prabhupada, and I really don't feel I'm missing anything, but rather I feel that I'm sort of getting more in a transcendental type of way than I was getting through reading these great devotees. So therefore, my perception of Prabhupada is that without a doubt, Prabhupada is on the level of the six Goswamis. He's on the level of Srila Jiva Goswami, who was particularly the main philosopher. He's on the level of Sanatana Goswami, Rupa Goswami, having read their works a lot. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he's more accessible than Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Like this. So,
yes, and in our busy lives, most of us, now most of the devotees are householders. Barely do we get time to even read Prabhupada's books. So what you just said is very important for everybody who is listening, because as an avid reader, you've gone through all of it, and you've experienced it, and as an authority, you're sharing with us that we will get much more, probably not just that, a lot more. Maharaj, you very nicely described for us and inspired us how Prabhupada's words and purports are in a sense, and they offer us so much more. Yet we hear from devotees sometimes that they say, they mention, at least in confidence, that they don't have the taste. They feel bored. And in your case, the purports are alive. The Bhagavatam is alive, as you described, and we can experience it the way you're expressing yourself. So what's missing for us, Maharaj? What is it that needs to be done as a prerequisite to be able to immerse one's consciousness in the form that you just described?
Well, I would say a prerequisite is to try one's best to really chant japa nicely. I have a little saying that there are 3 rules when it comes to chanting japa. The first is you have to chant attentively. The second rule is you have to chant attentively. And the third rule is that as much as humanly possible, you have to chant attentively. And, as far as I'm concerned, that's true. And I would say, I've experienced it. And if we do like that as a prerequisite, then there's a good possibility we will be able to become absorbed when we read. Having said that, I did mention my sort of breakthrough experience with taking notes.
Yes.
And not, well, now, but particularly when I used to travel, but in the pre-lockdown days, I would regularly recommend to devotees that they take notes. And I must say, a number of devotees wrote back to me, or when I met them later and we spoke, a number of devotees have told me that this taking notes practice really helped them in different ways. And one of the main way, perhaps, or one of the main ways was in becoming able to become absorbed, rather than you sort of floating on the surface of it and you don't really go into it and it doesn't really penetrate to your heart so much. And therefore at the end, of a period of reading, you just feel like, oh, well, okay. And not like, some powerful, beneficial experience has happened for you. So that's what I would recommend. First is you've got to really try and chant attentively as much as possible in the morning. And then when you read, don't just read like how we used to read us, before we were devotees, but read as a real student, one who's really trying to learn and understand and take the subject matter into the heart. These are the two things that I've realized.
Very valuable, Maharaj. It's something that we can practically all try to apply in our lives. Mm-hmm. And to the extent we'll apply, we'll see the difference. Maharaj, I would like to ask you that, are there some unhealthy reading habits? One isn't in the sphere of habits, and also in the sphere of, are there some unhealthy dispositions in one's mood which could become a hindrance in our progress of devotional service, especially when addressing the transcendental books?
Okay. Well, I would say in terms of habit, that it is a good habit to try to read in the morning. Yes. And it may well not be such a good habit often if we try and read like in the evening when we're tired and the whole mode of existence is heading off in the direction of sleep. But a good habit is to read in the morning. It's an excellent habit. And, a disposition, if we need to pray to have the attitude and perspective on Prabhupada's books, that these are like gold mines, they're jewel mines, full of nectar. We need to, prayer, of course, is one of the 9 devotional activities. And it's something which I think in many cases devotees don't sort of utilize as much as they could or should. And we should definitely pray to be able to read nicely and absorb what we're reading. Then another thing is we need to then represent what we've read. Yes. That's important. If we just keep it to ourselves, it's really not the same. But if we get the regular opportunities to represent, that reinforces what we've read and deepens what we've read. So like this seminar I'm doing now on Bhagavad Gita, I've done so many seminars over the last so many years. In the end, I feel that I've been the one who's got the most benefit.
Yes.
I was sort of the main student, so to speak. So
Yes.
representing is it's a cycle, because it's all a cycle. It doesn't just end with having read, like so many things in Krishna consciousness. And in order to really deepen everything, you need to fulfill the cycle.
Yes.
Yeah. So the dispositions, the disposition that, oh my God, I got to read as quickly as possible. And, the disposition that that other things easily end up taking precedence over doing it. These types of dispositions are detrimental, no doubt.
On the second one that you just mentioned, Maharaj, is a common tendency amongst managers, leaders who have so much service outside
Right.
of reading. Maharaj, I would like you to share with us your perspective as to what happens if the leaders of the society do not engage themselves or their followers in reading Prabhupada's books every day.
Right. Well, what happens is, there's a saying, old habits die hard. What happens is the old attitudes and so on, they start to become, not necessarily to take over the person's consciousness, but they start to become more prominent in sort of like the manners of dealing with other devotees, the ways of dealing with situations which are encountered in one's management or leadership. That, the element of sort of mundaneness at least starts to kind of show its ugly little head. And the richness of being able to have, really wonderful transcendental exchanges with the devotees that one is leading or managing, that richness tends to be replaced with just sort of how to get people to get things done.
Yes.
It's sort of it's not a rich transcendental type of consciousness which will then pervade the relationships and everything that the leader or senior devotee is trying to do. And in many ways, that makes the difference between a leader who the devotees will just gravitate towards and a leader who is kind of just tolerated because, he's in charge, therefore we have to. That sort of thing.
It seems from your explanation, Maharaj, that it would almost be counterproductive for the manager or the leader to go down that path, because either in the long term or even very soon, it will start working the other way around and not help them fulfill the main objectives.
Definitely. And, you do get devotees who become fried with their leaders or managers. And usually the root of the whole problem is related to that. Whereas if they're being led by really Krishna conscious people, then there's much greater tendency to be enlivened and inspired to do what one is asked to do.
It's definitely seems like that, Maharaj. And what to say of if two individuals in the same vicinity, if you mentioned the mundaneness starts to come up, or it can be quite chaotic, as sometimes is witnessed, the clash of egos, the clash of personalities, etc.
Right.
Maharaj, what would be your parting words to devotees on this topic of reading every day? Because that's something that we would like to see happen in the lives of not only temple devotees, but also the congregation community devotees. Could you say a few words to devotees who are otherwise working outside, living their lives?
Okay. Yeah, so my parting words in that regard would be that, if you read the last chapter of the Madhya Lila and the last maybe 10, maybe 15 verses of the Madhya Lila, the 25th chapter, you'll see that Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he describes the topics of Lord Krishna and the topics of Lord Caitanya as being, first of all, as being like food for the devotees, and just like a wonderfully healthy type of food. And the underlying sort of theme and mood is that these things are so wonderful and so enriching, and they give so much health that we have to absorb ourselves in these topics. And if we don't, well, Prabhupada gives a very sort of grave warning there in one of the very last, it's like third or fourth to last purports in the 25th chapter of the Madhya Lila, that if we don't do it, anyway, I'll let you all can have a look there and see what Prabhupada says. But it's such a stern warning. But then on the other hand, what has been said in those verses, it's just, we are sitting on a treasure trove, absolute treasure trove of information and nectar. So we need, there's a tendency just to get caught up in this and that and what's going on. Everyone practically has that tendency. But we need to invoke that discipline within ourselves of reading Prabhupada's books properly, like deeply, regularly. And then we'll see how our lives in Krishna consciousness become enriched, and then how we're able to help others too.
Yes,
Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, may I have your permission to just ask one last parting question?
Okay.
Maharaj, we have been hearing about this phrase, Srila Prabhupada as a preeminent Shiksha Guru.
Right.
And I was inspired by what you were just saying to ask you, what is the role of reading Srila Prabhupada's books every day, his transcendental books, to this idea, the notion of establishing Srila Prabhupada as a preeminent Shiksha Guru? If you can please throw some light on that.
Okay, well, on a personal level, that means he's your Shiksha Guru, mine, and everybody else's. And we have to, when someone is our guru, we have to have a relationship with them. It's not an official role. It's a living role in our lives. It should be, at least. So we have to make Prabhupada our Shiksha Guru, personally, individually, by availing ourselves of his Shiksha. Yes. And it's a requisite. It's not an additional, something over the top of those things which are essential. It really is essential. And the benefit, if we can just break through and get into it, the benefit is astronomical.
Maharaj, it is mentioned that Srila Prabhupada lives forever through his books. He made that statement, and it's definitely sure that that spirit lives forever also amongst his sincere followers like yourself. Thank you so much for your time today, Maharaj. Our time today was very short. Possibly next year or in the future, all of us will get to hear more from you about this very sweet topic of reading and nourishing our spiritual lives. On behalf of everyone who's watching, I'd like to thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,